Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey everyone, welcome to today's podcast. We are talking with Donovan Reed, and it's a great coaching conversation. I'm excited about it, but before we jump into it, I want to remind you always to go to churchboom.org. We've got so many resources and so many different programs that just help you as a pastor and as a leader. I want to encourage you to check that out. One of our most recent ones is Church Boom University. It's a great one for you to check out. I encourage you to do that. But hey, let's jump into the conversation with Donovan, and we were talking about how do you prioritize what's important and then knowing what's important as you continue to grow. It's a great conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Let's jump into it, man. How can I help you today? How can I serve you today, Donovan?
Yeah, absolutely. So our church has been growing. We've been here just over 4 years. We've gone from 35 to 160.
Love it.
And God's just doing His thing. We're planting, we're watering, and He's making it grow. Which we've got 10 acres. We're debt free. But our facility is about 4,500 square feet, all included: kids space, kitchen, bathrooms, sanctuary, foyer, right? So small space. Sanctuary is about 87 seats. We're in 2 services. 2 services are maxed out, and looking at 3 services and potentially building. And so kind of my thought process is, 3 services isn't sustainable for everybody everywhere. So we're going to be looking at 3 services and the potential of starting the process for building. What would be some leadership wisdom you could give to us in looking at navigating, that 3 service curve with, dream team volunteers, things like that, as well as knowing that it's not a sustainable thing, I think, in our culture here. So kind of going into that building process at the same time.
Well, first of all, it's a great problem to have when you're growing and being able to say, hey, we got to add more services. That's a great problem to have. That's the problem you want. Doing multiple services is in my opinion, I love it personally. I don't know if the staff likes it as much, but I've always liked it. I think at one point we were doing. What were we doing at one point? I think the highest we ever reached was 6 weekend services. So a couple on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, maybe 1 on Sunday night or something. And same services, just doing them over and over at one of our campuses. But it does come with some challenges that I think that if you're not careful, you'll end up hitting a lid really fast. So let's first talk about that. One of the things that I see with churches that start to grow is they don't focus on the bell curve. If you're familiar with the bell curve, the concept is, any organization, church or not, has this. It's starting to go up, and you got to start to know when it's going to plateau and why it's going to plateau. And you as a leader have to be ahead. That's why there's what is that? One of those phrases in the world, stay ahead of the bell curve. It's a common term. Well, really, you have to think, okay, if we don't do A, B, and C, we're going to do this, and we will level out. The building, we think, just build a bigger building, and they'll all keep showing up. Well, not necessarily, because there are certain things that have to happen to stay ahead of the bell curve. Now, you're wanting to stay ahead of the bell curve, so let's talk about that. First thing I think I'd be looking at is, okay, if I'm going to 3 services and we're continuing to grow, I'm going to be looking at and we've talked about this before, but are we recruiting people, and do we have a really great process where all of a sudden if 200 people showed up, is our team recruiting? Is our system getting people involved in the life of the church? Okay, that's one thing. It's like all of a sudden it's like, can we move that many people? Speed of engagement. Showing up is one thing. People come for the message, but they stay for the relationships. We got to get people engaged.
Right.
And can we get them engaged? Do we have the process in place to get them engaged? Do we understand how to get them engaged? All of that. That's one thing. Secondly is, do we have the leadership in place? I always say that leadership structure is a lot like the structure of a table. It's the same example I use all the time. I stand on the table, you stand on the table, someone else stands on the table. Eventually that table collapses because it's only made to handle so much weight. And you have to get to a point where, man, look and say, is our children's department really ready for this? Is our worship department really ready for this? Is our small group department really ready are we ready for 3 services? Are we ready for another, let's say God blesses you with another 150 people. Are we really ready for it?
Yeah.
You're a driven leader. I've talked to you a few times. You're a driven leader, and that's awesome. You're going to drive, but if you drive faster than your team is able to build, then you're going to build this house on sand. And what's going to happen is it's going to go, man, and then you're going to get stuck and go, why aren't we growing? Man, we were growing so good for 3 straight years. Why aren't we growing now? Bro, I hear this every week of my life from pastors. And I want to say, well, you didn't pay attention to the bell curve. You set up the church perfectly designed for this size. You did not develop leaders and the development of how you engage volunteers and build teams. You didn't look at the structure for the children's department. Like, what's their structure look like? Okay, is it just this person and all these volunteers, or did you restructure everything? Like, there's so much to consider, and they're thinking, well, why are we stuck? It's like we've been growing forever, but then we got stuck at 200 or 400 or 500. Well, you got stuck because you didn't stay ahead of the curve. Okay. I would highly recommend that you stay ahead of the curve. The speed of engagement, how you recruit and develop volunteers, how you develop leaders. Are they ready to handle that? Everybody, when you go to another service, all they think of is, oh, well, we're going to have another service, so I need 4 more volunteers and I need 2 more leaders. But they're not thinking about the structure. They're not thinking, and how are they developing these leaders? Are they really leaders? Or are they just managers with leadership titles? And you got to think about all of that stuff because you, as a leader, have to think farther, further, and faster than anybody else. You have to look down the road and go, if we don't solve this problem now, it's not going to be a problem today, but it's going to be a problem 9 months from now. We better start solving it.
Because we don't want to get there, plateau, and back.
Yeah, and it happens all the time. In my book, When Your Church Feels Stuck, we talk about the 6 phases of a church. One of those phases is whirlwind. We go up, we go down. We go up, we go down. We go up, we go down. Well, why do we do that? Well, that's because your leadership and your structure and strategies, it's not supporting the growth. And the growth will come back down every time. So I think that's something to consider on that side. Let's talk about the building. Are you thinking, let's move into that. Are you thinking of building another building or adding to the property you have? What's kind of the thought process there?
Yeah, so the thought process there is our current facilities becomes fully functioning for children. Current sanctuary becoming elementary, the current elementary becoming preschool, and then our wobbler walkers and nursery rooms would then max out, because right now our preschool fit into one of those rooms, but we're outgrowing those spaces. So, and then building a new sanctuary and foyer space. And the thought concept right now is building a new sanctuary foyer space that can be phase 1 and phase 2, so that if we outgrow during the building process, it's just a matter of maneuvering some walls and getting that stuff approved ahead of time is just the thought process. So that way we're not building too small and going, oh man, I got to do another building project. I got to do another campaign, but drawing outright for the growth that can come as a byproduct. Yep. Not that if you build it, they will come, because you still have to have all those other things.
Right. That would help.
But that's where we're at. We're kind of thinking that mentality of we don't want to build something where we're stuck size wise, but that same building can go from 300 to 600 or 300 to 500 or something like that to make room for more. That's the concept and thought we have right now.
So take the current building, make it children's, and then build a building that's more for the main auditorium. Yeah. And where are you at with that? Are you at a point of putting together a campaign? Have you saved a bunch of money and put that aside? Are you thinking about a loan? What's your kind of thought process?
So right now we're definitely on the finance side. We're staff heavy a little bit, but necessary. And with the growth, the finances hasn't caught up, but it's catching up in a beautiful way. We're watching that trend. So where we're at on that is when looking at having to do a campaign. Again, we're debt free. We've got a good amount in the bank. We've got some rolling in CDs just to make a little bit more than 0.01%. And so I'm really looking towards that, a capital campaign that's going to have to tie into the building side of things. So it would be both and. If we can raise enough to not have to take on a mortgage, great. But if a mortgage has to come, what does a healthy capital campaign look like? And in that process, right now I've got a guy drawing up. He's got the ability to draw building plans and things like that, so we have visual towards that. But we're kind of at that. Let's look at going to 3 services and then jumping fully into what a building campaign, capital campaign would look like.
That's good. The capital campaign, I would encourage you to get a little bit of help in that. I can help point you in some directions that I think of some guys that might be able to help you that live in that space, and at least give you some advice, even if you think you don't bring them on or hire them or whatever. But you want to make sure that you maximize that. When you're doing a campaign, you can only play that trump card once, and then you can't play it again. Like, well, that didn't work. We're going to do something different next year. You can forget that. It's you can do it once every 4 or 5 years. You can't do it every year. So you want to make sure to get it right. Any idea what you're looking to spend? Have you talked to any contractors or any architects?
Not yet.
Well, I just highly recommend that you get a couple thoughts. One, get some help, at least to think it through, because you have to think through, like, okay, what's this going to cost? How many people am I going to need? How long is it going to take? What size building should we build? We don't want to, there's an old saying, this is we shape the building, then the building shapes us. And you want to make sure that it doesn't shape you. In other words, boy, we bit off more than we could chew. And now all of our money's going towards just paying off debt. You've got to really make sure to make the right move. I'm not saying you're not going to, but it's so easy to make a mistake. Bite off more than you can chew, not approaching the campaign right. And they're like, man, we should have did this differently. Well, we played the card now. Not doing the campaign right. There's just so many things. So you just want to make sure you do that right. Meanwhile, simultaneously, I would get help to get some idea, like what number do we need to be at in order to start a building project? What number are we going to look to raise? Who do we hire? Like, how do we do that? There's a lot to consider in that. And you just want to make sure you make the right move. I've seen many, many guys make the wrong move and they pay the price for it. Now flip over to the other side. I think you need some help. I do. I think just get with someone and just get some numbers together in your head and figure out, like, okay, what's this really look like? Secondly, I would strongly remember that, hey, we're going to 3 services. Don't be afraid to keep pushing it, because you want that number to get higher and higher, so you have a greater base of support financially. So it might be, well, we really can't do this till we get to 4 services. I'm not saying that's what it is, but that might be the situation. So what you want to do is, I would do simultaneously. I would get someone to get some guidance for you. At the same time, I would be insanely doing 2 things: making sure that our teams are developing leaders and building teams. Our leaders, our staff, our key people, they're developing leaders. How? What are they doing? What's the process? Don't leave it to chance. Make sure that you lay it out for them. Develop leaders and build teams. In our Church Boom University, we talk about the leadership ladder. And people, that's something people sign up for through our Church Boom, but it's a university where they learn master classes, but we talk about this leadership ladder. You have to come up with your leadership ladder, whether that's something you learned from Church Boom University or your own thing, but how are you developing leaders? How are you building teams? That is so crucial, because what you don't want is, we got to get to full 4 services and then we can build it, but we're not being able to get there because we didn't develop leaders and build teams. So now all of a sudden, if you don't develop and leaders build teams, you won't get this big enough, which means you won't get this, be able to build the building. So realize that it's not one over the other. It's both are extremely important. So just remember that, because I'm telling you, you'll end up hitting the lid, and you don't want to do that. And you're going to need bigger numbers to be able to support that campaign. So
Yeah.
anyway, so hey, what else we got?
Yeah. So just kind of
Yep.
piggybacking on that. So really making sure that we're doing new things to get to new levels.
Yes.
Um, so what got us to where we're at today isn't going to carry us to 3 and 4 services. And again, I'm good if I go to 6 services. I can
Right.
preach 6 services. I'll sleep on
Yeah.
Monday.
I get it.
But so what you're saying is really just making sure, one, get those things in play
Yes.
now, and not only get them in play now if they're not in play, make sure they're structured, make sure it's transferable, make sure it's
Yep.
development. And then in that process, make sure that we're looking at what do we need to do, not just for right now where
Yep.
we're at, but how are we developing the leaders and raising up people so that we can get to where we know we need to get to in order to do that and not plateau.
That's correct.
And
You
fall
nailed
off
it.
enough.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
You want to make sure to do that because you will plateau if you don't. You want to make sure to do that because the campaign is relying on it. You need the numbers, and you need the support, the growth, and all that. I always say the bigger the core, the bigger the apple. So you got to develop this group here so the apple can get bigger. And developing leaders and building teams. I think guys often don't put enough strength and emphasis on it. So it's almost like, hey, children's pastor, we're going to hire you part-time, full-time. I'm not asking you to run to Costco and pick up the food and snacks for the kids and then run off the curriculum and do. I'm not, that's not what I'm looking for you to do. Is you develop leaders and build teams, or otherwise I call it the price of admission. You know, if you're going to be on this team, this is what we do. Not just at 200. We also do that at 2,000. We develop leaders and build teams. You got to make it duplicatable, and you got to hold them accountable to it. That's why I love 90-day runs. In 90 days, how many volunteers are we going to try to get? That's why I like a very clear system, because you have to have an idea of like, how do we develop leaders at this church? You might do it intuitively, but intuition's never duplicatable. You have to like, this is how we do it. And so if someone's like, I'm doing a children's camp, and then I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm like, great. Let me tell you how we keep score around here. We develop leaders and we build teams. And because if you don't, what will happen is you'll end up having a department or two that will hold you back because they didn't focus on what was most important. I see it all the time. We do a lot of executive coaching. One of our executive coaches was telling me recently that he's been saying, develop leaders, build team, build team. Now this church is ready to launch a second campus. Some building was given to him 20 miles away or whatever. Well, and the worship is like, hey, we're ready. Youth is like, man, we've raised up leaders and then they could go over there. And the children's like, no, we're not ready. So what's he going to do now? He doesn't have a children's department. So it's amazing that if you don't get everybody in the major departments developing leaders and building teams, they'll actually be the department that holds you back. From
that makes sense.
Launching other services to launching other campuses to whatever else that God leads you to. Yeah, it's not just something we do, it's who we are. That's the DNA of the church. So I highly recommend that you really look at that and figure out your pathway to make that happen.
Oh, that's good. One more question would be, so many times I see pastors go into multiple services, adding services, campuses, or in this case, a building campaign and building project and stuff like that. What would be some best practices or healthy things that either you've had to do or you see others do to just stay healthy in the process? I've seen guys literally go, all right, now that we've built it, I'm done. And I don't want to be that guy. I'm young and I'm ready to go. And maybe if I can see some blind spots before I have to experience them.
And you're talking about staying healthy as a pastor, or the staff staying healthy, like, just kind of mentally, emotionally?
I'm saying being able to, just as a pastor leading a staff through a process where you're building and you're in the process of leading through where you're leading through, but also the building's coming down the road, some practical things to put into play to stay healthy so you don't get to the end of that road going, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm out.
Yeah, I understand. I think some of the stuff we've all heard and read before, um, it's ironic that Jesus rested on the seventh day. Or God rested on the seventh day. I always say, well, I don't know if he was tired. I think he was actually just modeling what we needed to do. Obviously, I think there's that part: keeping your relationships healthy, keeping your marriage healthy, keeping your physical life healthy. Making sure that you are modeling that, and making sure, one thing, if you're a driven leader, you probably don't slow down long enough to celebrate. That's gonna be an issue for your team.
Okay.
So you're like, we did this next, and you didn't give them a chance to celebrate. That's a mistake I make often, where it's like, well, wait a minute, what we just did was pretty amazing. Let's stop and celebrate, and I think there's some mental things, emotional things, relational things that you can do, put into the staple of your life, and with your staff, modeling that as well, because you have to lead them. I'm a bigger fan of taming a wild horse than raising a dead one. So when it comes to staff, I'd rather them be out of control and have to pull them back rather than like, come on, man, move. But make sure that you're celebrating. Make sure that they're staying healthy. It's an interesting dichotomy with staff, I think, because it's interesting to me that sometimes when someone says, we're going to 5 services and I'm just feeling burned out, my answer always is, yeah, and let me tell you why. Because you're not developing leaders and building teams. You're doing it all.
Yeah.
So there's a dichotomy there of them doing it all, and if they're not doing what we talked about in the earlier part of today's conversation, they're going to end up telling you, we're worn out, I can't take anymore. Well, of course you can't, because you've been doing everything, and that's not what we hired you for. So just a little side note, if someone complains to you, but they're not developing leaders and building teams, but they're complaining to you that they're worn out, burnout, I'm like, don't receive it and hear them and be empathetic. Just a little side note, but be like, let's talk about why that's happening, because you're going to find out quickly. It's like, because you're not doing what we said. Anyway, that's a little side note, but keeping it all in balance, I think, is really, really important. And one of the things also I would encourage you to do is, I always say, you can't add hours, you can only trade them. No one gets to add more hours to the day. You only get to trade what you do. So as you continue to grow, you start trading, like, okay, I can't do as much of this as the pastor. I got to do more of this. So it's not just, now that we're 300, I got to start doing this. Now that we're 400, I got to start doing this. It's like, no, now that we're 300, I got to not do this anymore and start doing this, because this is more important. I think that's an important thing for you to consider. If I take on something, what am I letting go of? Don't put something on your plate without taking something off the plate.
That's
cool. You're just trading.
That's cool. I feel that.
Yeah.
I feel that.
Remember, you're trading. You're just trading. So, one of our executive coaches was talking, and I was kind of helping him with his coaching with someone. They've gone from 500 to 1,000 in the last 2 years. So he's really helping them get to that next level. And so he asked me, he's like, hey man, the guy seems like he's getting burned out and at 1,000. And I'm like, that's because he's not trading. He's only adding. He's adding to his list, not trading. And the bigger you get, it's like, okay, we're under 50 people. Well, you're doing everything. We're now 200. You're not doing everything. Now you got to get like, okay, but what's most important? Then when you get to 500, what's most important? Okay, well, you better be out there, are you building relationships with high capacity givers? Are you casting vision? Are you leading the team and training them to develop leaders? Like, you have to think more up here. And the bigger you grow, the more you got to think differently, because you're not adding hours, you're only trading them. And you can't put something on the plate without taking it off. Otherwise, you're going to pay the price, and so will the ministry. And what you're taking off the plate was like, that was great when we were under 200. I had to do all that. That's not as important anymore. It's more important I do this. It's kind of like I'm every example I use is always MLB, because I love baseball. When outside of one or two guys out there, 99% of the pitchers don't ever hit. And the major league coach doesn't really care if they hit. I don't need you hitting anymore. I did in college. I did in high school. I did in Little League. Yeah, we realize that. But you pitch 101 miles an hour. We need you on the mound. That's you. But I did all that. No, not anymore, Donovan. You need to, right here. We don't need you hitting anymore. We need you on the mound. And that's exactly what needs to happen as you continue to grow. That will keep things in balance. Always remembering, if I add something, I'm taking away. If I focus more on campaign and meeting with high-level givers, then okay, but then I got to let go of this. And or I got to delegate. You're always gonna automate, delegate, or eliminate. You're always gonna be doing one of those three things with everything you do. So you're automating it, you're delegating it, or you're eliminating it altogether.
Yeah.
So such an important part. Does that help, man?
No, that's huge.
Awesome. Well, dude, thanks for jumping on the podcast today, man. That's really cool. I really do appreciate it. And just know, man, I'm always here to help in any way I can.
Yeah, absolutely my pleasure. And thank you.
Right, thanks, man. Have a good day, buddy. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Donovan Reed and that you got a lot out of it. Always, again, want to remind you to go to churchboom.org. Make sure that you check that out. There's lots of opportunities to get coached. Churches under 100 get it for free. Churches over 100, we have executive coaching for you. Just a lot of great tools for you to check out. Go to churchboom.org and check those things out. I hope you have an awesome day.